7 tips on being more raw when you're photographing in the streets. Hi, it's Peter here. Let's get right into the business. Be spontaneous and intuitive. I always say that you need to think about your images and think what you're photographing. But this time, I think we need more spontaneous acting and be more feeling with the gut feeling and be more intuitive and photographing with the instinct. Because that gives us more freedom to photograph whatever we see. And being raw might mean that photographing anything that you see, just be spontaneous and click away and kind of like fire away without thinking too much. And if we start overthinking our images, we might miss a lot and we start kind of being afraid of the failure. Just fire away what you see and record everything as they are, and don't worry too much about what you photograph and how you photograph. Just fire away and see what the outcome is. That's really a revelation and freeing your mind when you can kind of take yourself kind of like out of the strict things about the camera. I need this type of camera and this type of that, and I need to make the composition like this and that. Try to get over that and do not overthink. And the same applies to overthinking your compositions. Do not overthink that I need to do a rule of thirds, I need to do this and that, all these rules. Forget everything and just shoot and enjoy your photography as an act of making those photographs. And I'm 100% sure that will lead to better photographs in the long run. You might struggle at first and get these really odd looking images, but if you really concentrate on being not so how would I say, rule driven, and then you might start improving your photography. It's good to know the rules, but once you know them, throw them away and you kind of shoot from your gut and with your instinct. And then experiment with different formats and different gear too. This does not mean that you have to buy a lot of stuff, but if you have an old digital camera laying around, just see if it still works and use that. Use simple gear and try different formats. Might try even film just to experiment with different types of photography. And one cheap way of doing that is find an old film camera or get a lomographic camera if you want to buy something, or disposable cameras, whatever. But experiment with that and see what the outcomes are. And this is also that the whole thing is to being raw is also, freeing yourself from the conventions. Try different things. I think that's the main point what I'm trying to say here. And with different types of gear. And don't worry about the lens quality. Is this the sharpest lens that I have and stress about that. Just take the vintage lens that you might have on your shelf and use that and see what the outcome is. And it doesn't have to be a very good lens. Everything can be unsharp. It doesn't really matter. What I did is I got a Ricoh GR3X about 6 months ago, and it has transformed my photography a lot because I don't have to think about the camera and I can be invisible in the streets, and it's just something. Okay, I know it's not very inexpensive. It doesn't have to be that. It can be something else that takes your mind off the camera and your mind towards the things that you're photographing. Let's talk about a few words about my one-on-one sessions, which have been, gradually being more and more popular. It's a 1-hour session via Zoom, and you send me some pictures beforehand. I look over them and we can discuss your path as a photographer and where you want to go. And important thing is that I'm not trying to make you photograph like I do. That's not the case. The thing is that I try to guide you to photograph the way you want. When we talk about your images on that, it's not about me, it's about your images and your way of doing. So I will put a link in the description and see if that's something for you to get better in your photography. And then number 4, look for the unconventional. The problem with many of us is that we try to photograph for others. And yes, that is okay if you're a professional photographer and you're assigned and commissioned to do something. That's a different thing. Now we're talking about the hobbyist that takes out the camera and photograph for themselves. Try to get out of that I want to please others and go for the likes type of photography. Try to photograph whatever you feel like is good, because we have to remember that photographs are not only documents of something or beautiful pieces of art. They're also memories. And photographing everything as you see, as you go, might act as a very good memory in the future. You go back to those images, remember the place you were, the things that happened in your life at that particular moment, and you might feel good. Of course, I hope it's good that has happened. But anyways, you kind of relive the moments, and I think that's something that we need to praise or give applause to, because that is one of the biggest things in photography as a hobby, is recording memories, and then just photograph a lot what you see, and don't overthink, as I've said many times. But I think that's something that many of us have to remember, and that's something that I've trying to concentrate lately. And what has happened, I think my photography has been better than it was like a couple of years ago when I was more towards the gear and making gear videos. Now that I'm concentrating on photography and thinking about that and not overthinking at the same time, it's made my photography better, at least. So it probably will help you too. Something that I've done is to sometimes photograph some unconventional objects in the streets that are not something that everyone would photograph, and I think that's a good way. I have this set of images that's called the Traces of Humans. The whole idea of that is that I start with that every time I go out. If I don't have anything, then I will have always something, and I have different types of subject that I photograph, and I start with that, and usually I end up with somewhere else when I just go with my gut feeling and start seeing things. But usually getting started is the hardest part. You kind of walk around and you don't really know what to shoot. Then start with something that you have a project, for example. I don't know if I'm ever gonna publish those photographs, those Traces of Humans, because not all of them are very good. Might be some good images which I could publish somewhere. But that's a good way of starting, is to have a project and start with that and then end up with something else. That works for me, at least. And before we continue, a few words about the inspiration that I got to make this video, or why I made it, is the exhibition of Daido Moriyama in Helsinki. His retrospective has been in the spring in the Museum of Photography, Gallery K1 in downtown Helsinki. And he's been one of my favorite photographers for many years. I first learned about him when I took a couple of workshops by Anders Petersen, a Swedish photographer who has very raw style, and he's also another one to look if you are interested in very raw style. But what I've had is, I've shown this before, I have the Daido Moriyama remix. Now it took the sharpening. This is a very interesting book. And then also another book by him is where he talks about his philosophy, how he photographs, and I think that's also another interesting book. And this is mostly, there are not too many pictures, it's about text, about his philosophy, how he photographs, and it's very interesting. And also the exhibition, I think it was said, I think Guardian newspaper from the UK said it's one of the best photo exhibitions in the world. Unfortunately, it already has been in many places in Europe, but now it's in Helsinki. I think it's still in a couple of weeks. So if you're in Finland, in Helsinki, go check out that, because it's one of the best exhibitions I've ever seen. And you probably agree with that, even though if that's not your style, try to understand the idea of thinking with your gut and not overthink your images. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned from Daido Moriyama. It has helped me a lot. And let's get back into the business. And embrace grain and high contrast. And this comes from, Daido Moriyama and his style. But what I mean by this is that you don't have to, of course, do the same style. But the idea here is to think about the content of your image and the feeling you get from the image, and not think about the high quality when it comes to technical quality. It doesn't really matter on these type of images. But of course, if you're doing a senior portrait of someone then of course they expect it to be sharp, and then use your best lens as you have. But with street photographs and this type of feeling from your gut, type of photography, don't worry about the image quality. It's all about the feeling and the sense, so that you feel something when you see the image. And they're like high contrast and really grainy images are something that you might want to do. And then emphasize authenticity in every shot. Authentic shots are something that we aim for when we're doing raw photography. Don't clean the environment. Don't, throw away the trash or throw away the trash. Move the trash if they're in blocking your view in an image, or the broken glass, or just photograph those and see what comes out. That will make your images better if you start really trying something different. And if you haven't done that before, go out and try and see where it takes you. If you don't like it, then go back and try something else, if that's too raw for you. But being authentic is something that we need. And you also have to, make yourself vulnerable and photograph your feelings and show your emotions when you photograph. That will make or lift your images to the next level. At least I think so. That has happened to me when I, trying to photograph how I feel and not forcing to do something else. It has made me a better photographer, and probably will help you too. And before we get into the last one, a reminder, I always have an extra tip, and I will have an extra tip after the last tip. And then something that we can pick from Daido Moriyama is to incorporate a sense of isolation. Even though Daido Moriyama photographed in very crowded places, he has this ability to isolate the things and kind of showing that he's actually quite lonely when he's photographing, because he's so into the act of photography. But it doesn't have to be like that. You can be more social and interact with the people you're photographing. That all can also be something that you haven't done before. That's also another thing. But if we want to go with the real raw style, then it's more about isolation. That's what I think. Even though photographing people in the streets and making contact with them is authentic and can be raw too. But on this particular inspiration from Daido Moriyama, it's the opposite. He usually kind of steals the image, which might not be ethical every time. As I talked about photographing in Geneva, and did I commit a crime over there, because they have a very strict street photography rules. So that could be, of course, the issue, so be aware of that. Try to isolate the thing so that there is some type of loneliness in the image, that you can see the feeling, if you're feeling like that. Yeah, I don't know if that made any sense, but it's all about trying different types of things and trying to open your mind and show your emotion in an image, because that is something that usually makes an image better if it evokes motions and emotions, of course, and people can relate to the stuff, or they might even feel better if the emotion is something positive. Remember that. It doesn't have to be very melancholy every time, but it can be something positive too. And the extra tip, movement and blur. As we talked about grain and high contrast, the same thing here. Try to incorporate movement and blurriness in your images when you're photographing the raw style. It's something that comes, of course, if you don't worry about that much about the shutter speed. Just let things be blurry. And I do have a video about that in my channel where I talk about that images doesn't have to be sharp. And it's related to this. You might want to watch that to learn more about this. But hey, thanks for watching, and bye for now.